Book 7, The Soldier in the Middle of the World, Chapter 21. I mean, what's the point of all of this? Lieutenant Kaya knocked on the back door of the small, unkempt house and looked impatiently around. A moment later, the door swung open. "Finally," Priscilla said. "I've been waiting for you for hours." "What do you want?" Anoki asked brusquely. "I don't have a lot of time." "That's it. We don't have any more time. He's leaving in the morning for Idemia." Anoki frowned. "Who?" "My father. We need to go see him tonight." Lieutenant Kaya grabbed her arm to pull her out of the house. "What have I told you about saying such things out loud?" "I don't know what the problem is. I mean, he's only—" Anoki clamped his hand over her mouth. "He's only the most powerful man in the world, who just this morning executed 2 men without another thought." Priscilla pulled his hand off her mouth. "That's what I mean. Didn't you say Onus was our contact and now he's dead? So we need to contact the general directly and—" "Do you not understand anything?" She sighed. "Oh, I understand I'm bored. This place is far worse than Anoki slapped his hand over her mouth again. "You don't ever say that word here. Ever." She yanked his hand off again. "This is stupid," she wailed. "There's nothing to do. Hardly anything to eat, and Idemia would be so much better. We just go to him, introduce ourselves as his daughter and son-in-law," she giggled mischievously. "Then he'll take us to Idemia. There's got to be something to do there." "Seriously? You're worried about finding something to do? Do you have any idea what's going on?" Priscilla shrugged. "I went to that meeting at the amphitheater. Looks like we have a guide now, although he doesn't act at all like Guide Zin—" For the 3rd time, she felt a hand smack over her mouth. It was beginning to hurt. "Another name you should never utter. Priscilla, you want to destroy everything?" Again, she pulled off his hand. "Everything is destroyed, isn't it?" she said, rubbing her face and stepping out of range of Anoki. "No, it's not," he whispered urgently. "It keeps changing, but to our advantage." Priscilla rolled her eyes. "And what are you going to do now?" she whispered back. "What's the point of all of this? I just don't get it." "That's obvious," he answered, looking around to make sure no one could hear them. "Look, you don't understand what my brother and I went through for so many years." "So tell me," she whined. "Will you listen this time?" Anoki glanced around one more time. He pushed her down on a log and sat next to her. "For years, my father was the joke of Scrub. From the day he arrived in tattered clothing and nearly starved to death, people thought he was insane. My mother felt sorry for him and eventually married him. But he was always talking crazy about secret organizations, 2 of them. One controlled by someone in the administrators, the other controlled by an unknown city over the mountains. My mother tried to tell him it was all in his head, and the neighbors who heard his stories kept their children away from our house. He couldn't even work because he made everyone around him nervous, going on about his secret life over the mountains, and then his journey of 3 moons back to the world, and that any of the old Garters discovered him, he'd be killed. We even thought he was crazy. We went along with his stories just to calm him down. He was sure he was going to run into some old Garter, and for years he tried to disguise himself. But everyone knew about Crazy Lakaya, and when he tied black wool onto his graying hair, he was even more noticeable. We spent our whole lives covering for him, checking under the bed for spies and assuring him the chickens weren't out to reveal him. It was a relief when he died 4 years ago. I was 22, my brother 21. But before he died, he told us to find Salem. He wanted us to prove he wasn't insane." Anoki shrugged. "Until last season, I was sure he was. Then I saw Salem with my own eyes and met Shem Zenas and Pedo Shin. It all seemed so unreal." He shook his head and backtracked. "My brother wanted to prove our father right. He started to believe him, thinking that maybe there was something to the stories. He came up with the plan. He joined the army like I had, and try to find out if anyone had heard anything about Salem. He met Sergeant Onus, who was in charge of supplies at the Sands Fort, and confided in him about what our father had said about a hidden city with all kinds of land and resources. I always thought it was a mistake to tell anyone else what we were trying to do, but Onus could steal my brother an officer's uniform, and wearing that would get him closer to General Jordan. He called himself Captain Lick and started working in the general's office. One afternoon, he confided to General Jordan about Salem, going so far as to tell him our father's greatest secret. Zenas was from Salem, and most likely got the entire Shin family out of the world and into Salem. My father never believed that Shin and the others were killed in the forest. He figured Zenas got them out the same way he got out. And he was right, of course, Anoki scoffed. My brother knew General Jordan had been a friend of Colonel Shin, and he thought the news that he might be alive would get the general interested in finding Salem. But General Jordan insisted my brother was as disturbed as Colonel Offra. Jordan said he'd seen Zenas and Shin arguing a few times, and he was sure that Zenas had stolen away Mrs. Shin. He was so angry with my brother for bringing up bad memories that he had him assigned to garbage patrols. My brother realized then that Jordan would never help us find Salem, but maybe Thorne would. He defected to Edge, along with Major Jordan, and tried to tell General Thorne about expanding his territory to the north. To win Thorne's trust, he gave him the information Thorne needed to have Jordan killed. But my brother didn't think it wise to tell him about the Shins or Zenas until the time was right. He knew Thorne was considering claiming for himself a son, and if my brother could be claimed, not only could he avenge our father, but maybe claim Salem as his own and rule the place that destroyed our father. My duty was to find the route to Salem. I quit the army and worked for the law enforcement groups the forts hired. Our father had said Salemites had been smuggling people out of the world for years, and it occurred to us that families like yours might be ones they'd tried to take. Working for law enforcement, I'd hear where trouble was and if people were sneaking around. Discovering your family and putting together the stories about Thorne's wife and 3 daughters hiding in different villages gave me what I needed. The late-night visitors, the ones I came out to investigate when I was working with enforcers and I first met your family, they were Salemites, weren't they? Engrossed, Priscilla nodded. My father said Salemites were very persistent, so they'd be back. If I could get close to your family, I could go with you, find the way to Salem, and bring back the news to my brother. Well, I did, but only to come back to find my brother was dead, killed by Thorne, the man we thought would work with us. Priscilla sighed in despair because for once she had paid attention and understood that things weren't going their way. So it is all lost. No, Anoki whispered. It's not. We have something General Thorne doesn't. Knowledge of where to find food. Don't you see? It's even better now. With Onus and Varys out of the way, all the profits and influence can be ours. But we have to present this opportunity to your father at the right moment. We need him to need us. Then he'll keep us safe. He doesn't need us yet. Priscilla nodded slowly. I think I get it, but Anoki, what about his son, Luck Thorne? I saw him once in the village and I think he looks a lot like Rector Shin. He might be their missing son. He is, he said in barely a whisper. I'm sure of it. But I doubt he's told the general about Salem, or he would have charged up there by now. Thorne believes that the Shin boy is his own, that Jatesi Brighter gave birth to him in the forest, and that he was found and raised by the Brighter family, but now he's returned to his father. Priscilla squinted. But Shin's not my father's son, right? Of course not. He's too young, but he's apparently letting the general think otherwise. I'm not sure what he's trying to accomplish, but if he has designs to take over Salem or Idemia for himself, then we better make sure we act before he does. So let's go see my father now, Priscilla whined. He said at the meeting that we're low on food, so we can tell him tonight about the food in Salem and get everything taken care of. Anoki gripped her shoulders. Not yet. It's too soon. So what are we waiting for? Him to get desperate enough to... Anoki stopped when he saw 3 soldiers coming down the alley. We'll discuss this later. Just spend 5 minutes thinking for once, and you might understand something. And don't say anything to anyone. He released her and jogged out of the yard to join the soldiers. But Anoki, Priscilla called after him. He didn't turn around, but marched away. Priscilla kicked at the dirt, folded her arms, and thought for 5 minutes. She came to a conclusion, got up, and started for the fort. Lieutenant Thorne heard the knock at the front door, so he knew the other men did as well, but they ignored it as they continued their dinner. The lieutenant leaned for a view of the front doors. The soldier on guard was talking to a young woman who was very insistent. Her voice, growing shriller, reached the eating room. But he will want to see me, I know it. Just to ask him to come to the door if you won't let me in. The general heard the commotion, but didn't bother to look up. Intrigued, the lieutenant continued to try to get a view of the girl, who the guard was pushing down the steps. Please, when he knows who I am, he'll want to see me. The general sighed, dropped his fork, and finally looked at his son. Go see what she wants. I can tell you want to. She can stay the night if you want. The lieutenant blushed as he stood up and left, deciding not to correct the general's assumption that the girl was his. Guide Leonard watched him with jealousy in his eyes. Guard, the lieutenant said as he approached the front doors. What's the problem? The girl stopped pushing against the soldier and looked up into the lieutenant's face. You're him, aren't you? The lieutenant furrowed his brows. Do I know you? The guard took half a step away. Not yet, but you will, she said, smiling as she smoothed back her ratty blonde hair. Judging by her face and scent, she hadn't bathed in days, and her clothing was more tattered than what the Vileheads wore. I guess I'm your sister, she said coyly. The lieutenant's eyebrows went up. My what? She stood as officially as she could. I know he's here. I want to see him, please. I want to see my father, she called loudly. The lieutenant gulped as he heard a fork slam on the table. Her what? The general's voice boomed. The girl's smile faded, and she licked her lips nervously. Sir, she called again, but with less enthusiasm. I'm your daughter. There was a sound of a chair being knocked down, heavy footsteps, and suddenly the general was striding to the door. You, my daughter, he said shortly. He scowled and jabbed his thumb toward the lieutenant. What, are you with him or something? The girl recoiled. No, of course not. Father, I'm Priscilla. Priscilla Thorne, your 3rd daughter? The general stared at her, visibly startled. I guess one of 'em was named that. But you're too old, he decided. How old are you? The girl was obviously disappointed. Maybe she expected him to embrace her, or at least invite her in. I'm 16. You don't even know how old I'm supposed to be? The general frowned. 16? What do you want? Priscilla's mouth dropped open. What do I want? I want to see my father. I want to get to know you. Thorne's face contorted into a sneer. No, you don't. You want something from me. What is it? Tell me. My dinner's getting cold. Priscilla shrank in surprise. Can I come in? Why? He snapped. I have no need of you, and you certainly can't keep my son entertained tonight. So what more do I want? Priscilla was thrown off course. The confusion on her dirty face suggested she hadn't expected any of this. I was hoping I could go with you to Idemia. What would I want with a 16-year-old girl on a trip to Idemia? You're useless to me. Unless you have something else to say, get off my porch. Priscilla stepped back, stunned, but looked at the lieutenant with pleading in her eyes. The lieutenant shrugged helplessly at her. The scruffy girl turned back to her father. But Thorne sighed in exasperation. Shut the door, he gestured to the guard and headed back to his dinner. The lieutenant's last view of her was with her mouth hanging open as the door slammed in her face. Feeling guilty for usurping her place in the mansion, she even reminded him of a cousin or two the same age. He stepped over to the window to watch her walk down the stairs in a daze. When she reached the bottom stair, she turned back around and looked at the front doors, perhaps hoping they'd open again and someone would invite her in. But when nothing happened, she burst into tears and took off on a run. The lieutenant, seeing how easily Thorne could reject his own child, returned to the eating room and sat down to a quiet table. Slither and Croup were watching Thorne, who was tearing savagely at his bread. "Does that happen often?" Professor Slither asked. "Daughters turn up looking for something?" Thorne grunted and picked up a fork. "First time. Guess as they get older, they're going to think I owe them something. If that one was prettier, she wouldn't be needing anything from me. But 16's old enough to find herself a man to take care of her." Slither nodded. "She was the third? Might the second and first be coming as well?" Thorne stopped chewing, his fork stalled in the air. "The other two," he whispered, taken aback by the idea. "Why should they? They're old enough now. Maybe 19, 17. Probably already have men of their own. They probably sent her away to—" He took another bite without finishing his sentence. Slither gave Croup a questioning look, and Croup shrugged. "Wonder where she's staying," Slither said. "Maybe she lives in Edge now." "What does it matter?" Thorne cut him off. "She's her mother's responsibility. What do I want with daughters?" The lieutenant had a variety of thoughts to express, many originating from the mind of Mari Shin, but he bit his tongue. "Well," said Slither, "at least we know she's not the responsibility of the lieutenant here. But if he does have a girl hiding somewhere, perhaps you should meet her so he can make sure he's not pursuing a relationship with his half-sister. How awkward would that be?" He chuckled at his words, but he was the only one. Alarmed by the idea, Thorne twisted to the lieutenant. "Do you have someone?" "No, sir. There's no time for women when I'm trying to get 3 years of studying done in one. I'm more interested in learning to command by your side than I am in having a woman in—" He found himself unable to utter the rest of the sentence that he'd so cleverly composed in his head. But Slither smiled in approval anyway. "No need to hurry, I always believed. Women only cause you troubles, as you can witness by the little demonstration at the front doors. Sorry, General, but I never understood your need." General Thorne had returned to his dinner. "Good strategy, Lek. But Slither, in time, he'll need a son himself. I recommend, though, Lek," he said, concentrating on his plate, "that you don't bother looking for someone until this crisis has passed. No sense in wanting someone who might not still be alive in a year." The lieutenant wanted clarification on what Thorne meant, but instead he only said, "Yes, sir." Thorne looked up. "Good answer. Remember that answer." "Yes, sir," he said again. "And, sir, I wish to apologize for my behavior earlier today." Croup paused in his eating to watch the general's reaction. Thorne looked into the lieutenant's eyes again. "You should. You were completely out of line, grossly incorrect, and utterly disrespectful. You were a disgrace." "Yes, sir," he said, staring back and making sure to not reveal anything more. The general continued to watch him for a moment, then nodded once. "Your punishment for your insubordination today is to have no contact with any females until I say so. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." Priscilla Thorne ran all the way back to the abandoned house she shared with 2 girls who did nothing all day but lay around on old sofas and occasionally have a visitor in the form of equally dull and dirty boys. She stopped at the back porch, sat down hard on the rock steps, and held her head in her hands to sob. She ignored the gnawing in her belly that again wouldn't be filled, and wished someone would come to her rescue. All she could whimper as she huddled in the growing cold was, "Mother, come find me. Mother, please come find me." "What's that noise?" came the impatient snip. Priscilla heard the door open but didn't look up to meet the hard look of one of the girls she lived with. "Oh, you again. I think that's all you do, cry and mope." "Ah, take it easy on her," came a gentler male voice. It had the unsteady quality of one who didn't spend a lot of time upright. The young man fell out of the doorway and onto the hard ground. Only after a moment did he say, "Ouch." "She's whining about going home again," the angry girl said, stepping out onto the porch and slamming the door behind her. "So go home," the boy said lazily, rubbing his arm. "I can't," Priscilla whispered. "Deceit," the boy nodded. "The one time I leave the grassy arena, stupid. I survived it too," he declared the obvious. "They didn't die under deceit," Priscilla sniffled. The girl sat on a stair behind her and exhaled so loudly her lips flapped. "Yes, they did," she intoned. "Everyone did. Accept it, Prissy. This isn't doing anyone any good." "They're alive," Priscilla insisted. She was going to say it. She had nothing left to lose. "In Salem." "Salem," the boy said casually. "Oh, you didn't say she was that severe a vilehead." "I'm not a vilehead," Priscilla insisted. "Salem," the boy said longingly. "Prissers, everyone on the vials is looking for Salem." Priscilla stared at him. "What?" "It's true," said the girl behind her, in a kinder tone. "Everyone's heard the stories of Salem. Their people hide in the forests. Sometimes they come out, but usually they just watch us. They tell us if we stop doing the vials, they'll take us back to Salem, where we'll get food and clothes and a family. Just over the mountain, just stop the vials." "Ha!" she snorted bitterly. "I stopped the vials, so where are the men in green clothes? The women in brown? I was so sure I saw one once, too." The boy nodded. "Me too. Talked to one once. Old man. Told me to follow him, get cleaned up, and we could talk. I didn't leave, though." "Why do you think everyone hung around the trees?" he asked Priscilla. "We were hoping to see Salem. It was supposed to open up at a certain time of the night, like a crack in the forest. You'd see a light, then you were supposed to get up and run to it. Never saw the light, though. It was always passed out." But, Priscilla stammered, amazed that the word Salem was so readily known. "That's not how you get there. There were paths through the forest. Then you had to go through the boulder field, then up into the canyon." It was the loud laughter that stopped her. "Paths through the forest?" the girl hooted. "Through the boulder field? Through it?" mocked the boy. "Tell me she's not a vilehead." "She's not a vilehead," the girl burst out, and they laughed. Priscilla gripped her head. Not even the vileheads believed her. It was hopeless. The lieutenant and Professor Slither were up at dawn to see off the general and Guide Lannard. The guide was wearing the red cloak fastened over a thick coat. He silently brooded as he looked around the mansion one last time. Outside, 30 soldiers on horseback were waiting in the cold morning. A thick frost already lay on the ground, far earlier than there should be that time of year. General Thorne was buttoning, one-handed, his heavy waistcoat. "I suppose it's a good thing I had to return. I didn't think I'd need this coat already. But raining season seems intent on coming early this year." "It's because of the sun, General," Slither suggested. "It can't burn through the haze left by the volcano. We may need to consider that planting season will come late. If it comes at all," he added quietly. Thorne picked up a sheath and sword from the side table and glanced at the old professor. Now, why would you say something like that? He asked, as he flipped the belt around his waist and easily buckled it. Slither shrugged. Just something for you to consider, General. That's why we have the guide, Thorne said grandly, to see us through these dark days. Guide Leonard sighed. Sir, I just hope I'm up to the challenge. I know you said I'd feel inspiration come, but honestly, He shrugged lamely. Thorne put on a strange smile as he grasped the guide's shoulder. It will come, guide. When I am with you, I feel inspiration. Perhaps this is how the Creator will work, through you to me. Slither nodded. That's most likely true. I read a great deal about this. I wouldn't be at all surprised if the General receives inspiration while in your presence. You act as a pipe, in a way, channeling the Creator like water to our General. The lieutenant was glad they'd be leaving soon. The tip of his tongue would soon start bleeding for all the biting it was receiving. Thorne put on his cap and turned to Slither. Keep up on his studies, Professor, and keep me informed of his progress? Of course, General. Thorne turned to the lieutenant. His eyes were the mirrors again, but so were the lieutenant's. Behave yourself, Luck. You're free to spend a few days at the fort each day reviewing the supply lists. Twig will be expecting you this afternoon. Yes, sir. Thorne squinted. Still can't say it? Father? The lieutenant kept his eyes solid. Doesn't seem appropriate right now, sir, in front of others in a formal situation, he added his explanation. Perhaps when you return. Thorne squinted as if looking for something. All right, then. The next time I see you, I expect more respect. His face softened as he took the lieutenant's shoulder, patting it awkwardly. It was good to see you again, son. I'm sorry it was such a short visit, and hopefully you can join me soon. I look forward to showing you Idemia. The general stumbled on his last sentence, as if almost frightened by the words. He covered by giving his best fatherly smile, which needed more practice. The lieutenant stared deep into the general's eyes, and he noticed that under his practiced stare was a hint of fear. Something about having the lieutenant in Idemia made the general nervous. The lieutenant squared his shoulders. I look forward to seeing it, sir. Have a safe trip. Then, although he knew he couldn't help himself. He said, I hope you sleep well in the High General's mansion, sir. Perhaps the general would think the lieutenant was referring to his recent bad night. Or maybe he'd remember that the lieutenant's great-grandparents were murdered there as they slept. Or that his grandfather had a year of disturbed sleep, the effects of which frequently startled a young Captain Thorne. The lieutenant kept his face still as he waited for the response. Thorne didn't move for several seconds. He didn't even blink, but there was a slight twitch in the corner of one eye that didn't escape the lieutenant's notice. He would smirk about it later. Finally, the general nodded once and said, Thank you, Leck, before he headed out the door. And that's the end of that chapter. Thank you.